This train does not need to be charged or refueled. It runs in the Australian desert and managed to travel 1,100 kilometers without stopping during a test run. We're talking about the Infinity Train. Of course, it's not a perpetual motion machine, but it makes extremely clever use of physics. An ore mining company wants to use the Infinity Train. It currently operates 54 diesel locomotives and wants to replace all of them with the Infinity Train by 2030. The aim is to save 82 million liters of fuel per year in the best case scenario. In this video, we will look at how the Infinity Train works, which other vehicles can also operate without charging or refueling, and how sustainable the trains really are for everyday use. And with that, welcome to the German Science Guy. I'm Dr. Jakob Beautemps, and in Germany we say Los geht's. The Infinity Train is to be used in mining. More specifically, it will be used to transport iron ore. According to Fortescue, with a total length of 2.8 kilometers, the train could transport 34,404 tons of iron ore. By way of comparison, the European standard length for freight trains is 740 meters, so we're talking about super long trains. The Infinity Train has to cover a distance of 620 kilometers from the mines to the port, so also a very long distance. Fortescue has been using diesel locomotives for this purpose up to now. However, all 54 diesel locomotives are to be replaced by Infinity Trains by 2030. The company has budgeted $50 million for this between 2022 and 2024. But according to the forecast, it will be worth it. The train do not rely on external power or diesel. According to Fortescue, this could save 82 million liters of diesel per year, and with that approximately 128 million Australian dollars at current diesel prices, or approximately 90 million US dollars, and over 217,000 tons of CO2. According to the company, that would be 11% of the company's emissions. The train was unveiled back in the early 2020, but now there are some updates. In 2025, the first prototype traveled 1,100 kilometers across Australia to the mining region. This was framed as a major test run, even though it had nothing to do with the real-world conditions, but I will come back to that in a moment. But first, let's talk about how does the Infinity Train work without refueling and charging, and what does a route condition have to do with it. At first glance, the train sounds like a perpetual motion machine. In other words, a machine that generates more energy than is supplied from the outside. According to the first law of thermodynamics, however, a machine cannot perform work without absorbing energy. Even if some YouTubers claim differently, well, the Infinity Train cannot overcome the laws of physics, either YouTubers can. But what the train does is it uses the physics extremely clever. Let's take a look. The principle behind the Infinity Train has long been used in trains and electric cars. Recuperation. Recuperation recovers energy during braking. When braking, the electric motor becomes a generator. It converts the vehicle kinetic energy into electrical energy. The principle behind this is induction. The movement of the train causes the rotor to continue rotating. Induction coils are attached around the rotor, and the rotor itself generates a magnetic field. The rotation causes a magnetic field in the coils to change constantly. According to the law of induction, this leads to a voltage in the coils. In principle, this can also be reversed to say the outer coils generate the magnetic field and a voltage is created in the rotor. But in both cases, this voltage can then be tapped and then results in current stored. The Infinity Train also uses this principle. In fact, the route it is supposed to cover when fully loaded is downhill. This allows the Infinity Train to gain energy. How much energy the train can recover depends among other things on how much elevation difference it has to overcome. When the train travels downhill, the potential energy is converted into kinetic energy. The more potential energy there is, the higher and heavier the train. The more kinetic energy is generated, which then can be recovered during braking. Of course, friction and other factors must also be taken into account. The amount of energy recovered, therefore, depends on how heavy the train is and how great the differences in altitude it has to overcome. A heavy train can therefore recover more energy than a light one. And this is precisely the important point. If the train travels uphill without a load, it is lighter and requires less energy for the journey, which means that the stored energy is then sufficient to travel the entire distance uphill again with the empty train. But in fact, that's not all. There could also be energy left over, and that could then be used in the company. Okay, so much for the theory. Before we get to the big hurdle of this video, where we take another look at the critical points and problems of the infinity train, I would like to introduce a concept that is very similar and already works in practice, namely the heaviest electric vehicle in the world, and it also runs solely on energy from recuperation. A dump truck in the Bürger Jura in Switzerland. It weighs 50 tons, has a 4.5 ton battery and can transport up to 65 tons of rock. It also drives downhill fully loaded, gains energy through recuperation and can with that drive uphill again empty. So the technology is already in use. Now let's get to the big hurdle of this video. Before we do this, click on subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any more videos. And if you want to support the channel and also get some benefits like behind the scenes looks, maybe you want to become a member of this channel, this helps me a lot. So, okay, let's talk about recuperation. Recuperation is already widely used and for good reason. It just saves a lot of energy, which is very logical. When it comes to the details about the train, however, the research becomes tricky, and that's my first little hurdle. There are no scientific sources about the train at the moment. The sources are all based on statements from the company or other articles, so you always have to be a little bit careful. And what surprised me was that, apart from a few LinkedIn posts, there's hardly any information about the infinity train or the test run available from the company. We have of course written to the company, but have not yet received a reply. If they answer, I will add it to the video description. And I already mentioned the test run earlier. The test run has certainly not yet proven the infinity train concept, but simply shown that the battery technology itself can cover the distance. The train was neither as long as it is supposed to be in real life, nor as heavy, nor were any other real life conditions met. However, it must be said that the test run did at least deliver the first two machines to the site, where they will now undergo a series of tests under real-life conditions over the next few months. The two locomotives are among the heaviest battery electric locomotives in the world. One locomotive weighs 265 tons and is 24 meters long. A comparison, at 370 meters, the ICE-4 is more than 15 times as long, but only 2.5 times as heavy. Each of the locomotives has a 14.5 megawatt-hour battery. It is now to be tested under real conditions before it is actually put into service on the line later this year. At the moment, they still need to be charged additionally. However, according to the company, they should already be able to recover 40 to 60% of their energy through regenerative braking. The company hopes this will save 1 million liters of diesel per year, and by 2030, all diesel locomotives are to be replaced by such machines. Okay. But assuming that the infinity train concept can be implemented in the future from a technical point of view, there's still one small hurdle that simply has to do with physics. In order for the train to run as planned, the external conditions must be right. The train needs a gradient so that it can charge. In addition, there's of course the question of whether the battery can charge sufficiently if, for example, the train is not fully loaded and therefore travels down the gradient with significantly less weight. The train is therefore subject to very specific conditions and can of course only be used there. Some people in the internet claim that we can build artificial mountains to use the technology at every place in the world. But this would probably not be possible. And I like to add at this point, please always be careful with information on the internet. I mean, there's so much fake news out there. And for me, it's very important to me that I always quote my sources here. So you always see the sources that I mentioned in the video, and in the video description then there's a link to the source, so you can always check it yourself. So please be careful in the internet. Okay, but there's one more point that we have to talk about, and that is that regenerative braking means that we rely on charging a battery. So we still have to figure out how long is the service life of the trains and how expensive is the replacement of the old batteries. So these are some hurdles. In the end, we can say the infinity train makes extremely smart use of physics, but the technology of recuperation is already in use in a lot of train systems. The German train system alone generated 1,500 gigawatt hours of electrical energy with it by 2024. For comparison, that is roughly as much as 441,000 two-person households consume per year, or, and this comparison actually makes more sense, over 6% of the total electricity consumption of the German railway system. Even if the possible applications are limited, recuperation can of course save a huge amount of energy. I think that even if the train is ultimately only powered by 80% regeneration and 20% fast charging, for example, it is definitely a breakthrough. But what do you think about the technology? Do you think it will work? Feel free to write your thoughts in the comments. And here is another exciting video on this channel. It is about a technology that is currently being developed in Germany. It is about transmutation, and what they want to do is they want to recycle nuclear waste. Very interesting. I was on site with the startup itself, so take a look at this video. And I say Auf Wiedersehen, which means goodbye in German. Thank you for watching. Your Jacob.